G'day team, welcome back again. Today we must be looking at environmental considerations that impact on our performance. So again, for those of you playing along at home in your essentials book, you'd be looking at topic 3.2, environmental considerations and performance. So in other words, what's going to impact on our performance from the environment. So body temperature is normally at 37.5 degrees. Okay, and it actually doesn't take too much of a change for us to feel unwell, whether it be an increase or a decrease. Okay, skin surface is where the temperature changes. So we know, hey, when we're a little bit cold, we can get goosebumps. Right? So the skin surface temperature changes quite easily, right? But our actual core temperature doesn't change too much unless we are, as I said, unwell. Whether that be unwell in terms of having a fever, our body is hot, or being unwell and a core temperature dropping. Temperature drop can lead to hypothermia. So I guess the easy way to remember it is if temperature drops and it gets cold, you would have polar bears. Polar. Okay? So temperature drop is hypothermia, po for polar bear. Whereas a temperature increase can lead to hypothermia. We'll look at the changes that can have for our performance. It can be quite as simple as losing coordination, which then can affect skill performance, and it can be a little bit more extreme as well. Okay, so we've got vasoconstriction and vasodilation. Without even going any further, and you go, hang on, vasoconstriction. Again, you break down that term. Constrict. If you constrict something, what do? Right, you make it, I guess, harder, tighter, all right, narrower. So that's the process where blood vessels narrow or constrict as a result of a decreased body temperature. Whereas vasodilation, dilation, diameter increase. So why would we have these things? As we've got down here, survival. It's about survival. So vasoconstriction, where the blood vessels might constrict. So you think if we're lost out in the snow and we're trying to survive out in the wilderness, right, the blood vessels will constrict, right, to make it harder for the blood to get through. Right. So what that means is they'll constrict around the arms and the legs, the non-essential elements of our body. Right. So less blood goes out there, so we're keeping more blood in around the vital organs, our heart, our lungs, our liver, those sorts of things, as a survival mechanism. And then the opposite process, whereas if we're actually trying to cool ourselves down, all right, those blood vessels will increase in size or vasodilate, so they become bigger, therefore blood can easily flow out to the extremities, so our body doesn't overheat. So our body is actually quite a smart system, and it is about, as we said here, that survival aspect. So, exercise in the heat. We as athletes don't like exercising in the heat. It's hot. Right? Let's get beyond the year 8 attitude of, oh, it's hot. Let's focus on the year 12 attitude of, why don't we like it? Because it comes harder. Why does it become harder? Because cardiac output. Now, what is cardiac output again? All right. Remember, we've got things like stroke volume, which is the amount of blood pumped out per beat. We've got heart rate, number of beats per minute. Cardiac output is the amount of blood pumped around the body per minute. So, cardiac output is increased. So what is actually going to happen is, as we exercise in the heat, all right, there is an increase in blood flow to the skin. In some cases, it can be up to as much as a quarter of our cardiac output. So if we're taking a quarter of our cardiac output and pumping it to the skin, so in other words, we're taking a quarter of the blood available to us, a quarter of the blood that can carry oxygen to the working muscles, we're taking a quarter of that and pumping it out to the skin so that it can be cooled down. What does that mean? Well, it means our body is only able to operate at up to 85 or 75% of its actual cardiac output. So that is why it becomes harder to exercise in heat, because our body is going, dude, it's hot. Righto, if it's hot, I'm going to pump some blood out to the skin. Blood sits out just under the surface of the skin. It can cool down, which cools our body down. But the downside is, as we said, maybe 20-25% of our blood flow isn't going to the working muscles. So if it's not going to the working muscles, then our performance is decreased. So you think if it's an athlete in a running race, well now, instead of getting up to 85% of their max, they can't. They might only be able to get up to 75% of their max. Okay. So that's why exercise in the heat is more difficult. So heat loss. Our body wants to try and stay cool while we exercise. We said our core temperature is at 37.5 degrees. We want to try and stay at that. All right? So our body works much like an evaporative air conditioner. So as we exercise, as we run, we sweat. So sweating is actually a good thing. And those of us that are great sweaters, all right, like myself, walk to the mailbox and break into a sweat, it's a good thing because it is actually keeping us cool. We sweat, then we run, all right, the wind blows over that water on our face and it will cool us down. So sweating is generally a sign of, hey, my body is trying to cool down. Now that works well around places like Yorke Peninsula where it is a hot, dry heat. But where it doesn't work as well is in humid environments. So for example, up north in Darwin. Since it is so humid, right, the air around us already has enough moisture in it that it doesn't want to pick up that moisture off your forehead. So it's going, nah, I don't want to pick up that water. I've already got enough water in my air. Don't need that. It leaves it there. Therefore, we don't cool, which is why people will often say, it's so uncomfortable or hot and sticky in the tropics because the air is so moist, it doesn't want to take the moisture off your face. Right? That's why people say, I sweat a lot more. So we're losing moisture. As we exercise, we are losing moisture. That's okay. That's our body trying to stay cool. But what we need to be aware of is replacing that. Right? And that needs to be replaced at 1.5 kilos lost over 2 to 4 hours. So in other words, if we lose a kilo of weight, we need to replace that at 1.5 kilos or 1.5 litres of liquid for every 2 to 4 hours. So what I'm meaning by that is let's say I weigh in before exercise and I weigh in, I'm doing some great drawing here, I weigh in at 98 kilos. And this is what they actually do with a lot of the athletes. Australian cricket team does this in places like India, right, where it is quite not tropical, but quite humid. They might weigh in at 98 kilos before a training session. They then weigh them after, and they go, okay, you're now weighing in at 92 kilos. So they go, you've lost 6 kilos during that training session. So what we need to do is we need to replace that at 1.5, at a rate of 1.5. All right, great drawing here, but that's okay. So 6 times 1.5, my maths would tell me, equals 9. All right, which means they need to get in 9 litres of water, 9 litres of fluid, so water, Gatorade, Powerade, those sports drinks, over a 2 to 4 hour period. And this is what the nutritionist on the side will actually do. They will do all these sums and then they'll basically say to the guys, all right, you've got to drink this bottle of water. It's not a matter of gulping it down. As I said, we're trying to get it over a time period. Right? Because dehydration can also lead to a reduction in performance. So we need to make sure we've got that fluid in our body. Cool drinks are absorbed quicker. Right? And when we're looking at fluid, we need to make sure we are taking it in at the right rate. As I said, not quickly. We should be looking at 150 mils of water or a sports drink, 150 mils for every 15 to 20 minutes of activity. So in other words, small sips regularly is the key. We aren't wanting big gulps. We aren't wanting to scull things. So in heat, when we're performing, 150 mils to every 15 to 20 minutes. Exercising in the cold. Again, our body is a very, very clever machine. So if we're out in the cold, our body is wanting to restrict blood flow out to the limbs. It's wanting to keep it around the vital organs. As we spoke about, polar bear, can lead to a decreased performance. Why? Because there's less blood flow out to the limbs. Therefore, we can actually lose coordination. Now, as our body temperature drops, it tries to recoup that loss in body temperature by movement, quite simply shivering. So you can see people when they're really cold, the reason they are shivering is their body is trying to do a little bit of exercise. It's trying to get blood flow happening around the body. Right? It's your body's way of compensating. Okay. Water cools much quicker, so we need to be aware of athletes that will be in water, say for example swimmers. So if we are particularly ocean swimmers, we need to be aware that, they can actually be at risk of hypothermia a lot greater than athletes out in the cold. Frostbite. So frostbite, and then where we lose sensation in our toes and our fingers, as we said, we can lose coordination. What also we lose? We lose force in our muscles. So muscles lose force in the contraction for every degree below 27 degrees. So you think, okay, no worries, 27 degrees. Every degree we drop below that, our muscles actually lose a little bit of their force. So you now think when we get those lovely days in the middle of June, July, where it's raining and windy and cold and it's about 12 degrees, you then start thinking, okay, well, that's probably why I'm not playing my best sport at that particular time. Because, we can be up to 15 degrees below that optimum temperature. So we need to be aware of all these things. So we've looked at the heat, we've looked at the cold. Another impact on the body is altitude. So at 5,000 feet or 1,524 metres, performance is affected. So what we mean by that is, as we can see in this next point, your VO2 max will reduce for every 300 metres above that point. So as we go up, we actually lose VO2. Reason being, there is less oxygen in the air at altitude. Less oxygen. So we're breathing in the same amount of air, but since there is less oxygen in that air, it's harder for us to work. We've almost got to breathe in twice as many times to get the same oxygen. You then start thinking about people that are, mountain climbers when we're getting up at those massive altitudes. You then realise how hard it is up there. Now, to give you a bit of an example of, well, how high is 1,500 metres? It's actually not that high. If we look at our ski trip where we're going to the Victorian Alps, Mount Buller or Mount Hotham, they are only 1,800 metres above sea level. So even when we're up there, our VO2 max is reduced. So what athletes will do is if the Olympic Games are in a high altitude venue, they will go ahead of time, and they will try and acclimatise. Now, acclimatisation takes a period of time. So you'll see a lot of those athletes for the Olympics will head over up to a month in advance so that they acclimatise to the conditions. As I said, it takes 7 to 10 days. So we need to be acclimatised so we can perform at our best. Now, some of you are sitting there going, well, altitude, I've heard about this altitude training and they send all the athletes off doing altitude training. Why would they do altitude training if it's actually worse for us? Okay? So, we'll get to that point in just a moment. Lower levels of oxygen in the air. So as we said, we breathe in the same amount of air, there's less oxygen in it. So therefore, we have to breathe more often to obtain the same volume of oxygen. Blood volume also decreases. So what does all this mean? Well, it means our performance is going to be reduced. or it means our body has to work harder. Our heart has to pump possibly twice as hard to get the same volume of blood and oxygen as it would at sea level. So to perform the same task that might just be walking, our body has to work twice as hard. So suddenly, intense activities become very, very difficult. So, breathing in more often. So this is the previous slide. We've just answered a few of these questions. So lower levels of oxygen in the air. We breathe more often to obtain the same volume. Breathing in more often means an increased heart rate. Okay. Blood volume decreases, which means stroke volume decreases. So if stroke volume decreases, cardiac output would decrease unless we increase our heart rate. And that's what we've done. So as I said, to get the same, cardiac output, to produce the same activity, walking, we would have to increase our heart rate because our stroke volume has decreased. So our heart might be beating twice as hard just walking, which means we're going to reach our heart rate max sooner. Now, we spoke about altitude training. We said, well, why do it if we're actually losing our VO2 max? Because the benefits of this altitude training, if we go up there, we acclimatise. Our body becomes used to the conditions up there. What our body does is it gets a bit smarter after a while, and it will increase the number of red blood cells in our body. Why do you think it does that? Why would our body go, I've got to increase the number of red blood cells? Because if there's more red blood cells, what are they able to do? Hey, carry more oxygen, which is what they're able to do because there's an increase in hemoglobin. So our body's going, whoa, I've got to adjust to this. There's less oxygen in the air up here. So if I make more blood that's got more hemoglobin, what that can do is carry more oxygen. So all of a sudden your body has now adjusted to try and make it a little bit easier. Okay. There's also an increase in myoglobin. So in other words, our body's going, I need more myoglobin to get that greater hemoglobin out into the working muscles. So to sum it all up briefly, there is less oxygen in the air at altitude, which means our body has to work harder. Our heart has to pump harder, more often. What your body does after a while, after it's adjusted, it's acclimatised, it'll increase the red blood cell concentration. So we've got more red blood cells, more hemoglobin, carries more oxygen to try and ease that workload. Now if we then go from the top of the mountain where our body's made all this adjustment and now we come back to sea level, what's the advantage? We've got this extra blood cells, extra hemoglobin, extra myoglobin. We've got all that extra stuff. We now come back down to sea level where, hey, there's more oxygen in the air down here. So I've got more oxygen in the air. I've also got more things that can actually carry that oxygen around the body. That's where the benefits of altitude training kick in. Our body has adjusted and it's now down here going, beauty. There's heaps more oxygen and I've got a greater ability to carry it. That's why they do altitude training. Okay? So, altitude results. The other thing, I'll go back a couple of slides because I don't think I made a very good point of that. Lower humidity at altitude. Lower humidity. Less oxygen in the air. So you'll hear people say the air is thinner. The air is thinner because there is less moisture in it, less oxygen in it. So since the air is thinner, you start going, okay, what events at the Olympics would benefit from the air being thinner? And that is something like a long jump. Bob Beamon, the 1968 Mexico Olympics, all right, broke the record. Went from 8 metres 35 to 8 metres 90. Now that record stood until 1991 because as he is running and jumping through the air, there is less air resistance. He's able to travel a little bit further. So our short sprint power explosive events will actually benefit from being at altitude. Which Olympic events would struggle at altitude? Hopefully you're thinking anything with endurance, because hey, our VO2 max will drop by 3% every 300 metres above 1500. Okay, so you can start to see, wow, altitude does play an impact. There's a couple of little videos there if you want to watch them about, I think that one's about the Collingwood Football Club that wandered off overseas. Did a bit of altitude training, if you'd like to. So, as I said, that's the impact the environment plays on our performance. So we've got the heat, how the heat can actually sap our VO2 or our cardiac output because we're pumping more blood to the skin to try and cool down. We've got the cold elements where we can lose muscular power, and we can lose coordination because blood flow isn't going out to the limbs. And then we've got altitude, where it can be a case of, hey, we lose VO2 as we elevate ourselves, but our body can adjust to that, which can end up being a good thing when we return to sea level. And then we've also got dehydration. Dehydration can affect performance, and we need to ensure that we're keeping those fluids up. So we can see, hey, there are a lot of things just in the environment that impact on our performance. So we need to be aware of them so that no matter what the elements, we can take that into consideration. So that's about it for today. Thanks, team. Until next time.